Please be seated. When I chose where I was going to go to school to get my Master's of Divinity, which was the route I chose to get ready for ordination, one of the main reasons I picked the school I went to was that it was a part of a very active consortium. And so I was assured before I ever got to Berkeley, California, where my school was, that I would be in class with people from other denominations, and I would go to some classes at the other schools that weren't Episcopal. And one of the things that my school had just started doing with a new curriculum that I was in the first year to use was flat out requiring that we would take a class that came out of another tradition entirely. Because it turns out that the consortium that my school was part of not only had the Episcopal school, the Dominican and the Jesuits, the Methodists, and so on. We did a lot with the Lutheran school. There was also a Jewish institute, a Buddhist institute, a Unitarian Universalist school. So we had the ability, and suddenly we had the requirement, to also learn about something that was entirely out of our own tradition and our own belief system. And so I took a class on Theravada Buddhism. And the truth is, it didn't take me all these years since I graduated to be able to tell you that the first thing I can tell you about Theravada Buddhism is that I don't understand much of it. I never felt like that was entirely the point. As I came to understand it, the point, especially for taking something like Buddhism as a Christian, was simply to understand and gain a greater respect for an entirely different set of beliefs. And so when we would learn more of the nuances of this particular kind of Buddhism, and I would sort of want to scratch my head and say, why in the world would you do that? And why would you believe that? I also would stop and think to myself and occasionally say out loud in class, you know, those of you, because there were people in my class who were entirely raised in the Buddhist tradition, if you were to come and sit in on one of my classes and get an introduction to the Episcopal Church and our particular way of following Christ, I'm pretty sure that you would have just as many questions about why we would believe the things we do and why we would do the things we do. Because in the life of following Christ, we have tried so hard to understand, and we've declared some things as doctrinal truths. We say some of them in the Nicene Creed. Jesus is fully man and fully God, was present in creation, and creation only happened through Jesus and the work of the Holy Spirit and God the Father. And yet, by the same token, in the Episcopal Church in particular, we try to leave room for all the things that we can't understand. And that, I'm afraid, and I'm happy, leaves so much room for questions and for doubt. And maybe it's because I grew up in the Episcopal Church. I grew up with this idea that there were divine mysteries, some of which I could get a glimpse into, and some of which are entirely beyond my understanding, that I have so much fondness for Thomas. And I have long thought that he gets a terrible reputation every time that someone refers to him as doubting Thomas. I hope it's clear, because we actually get in this gospel 2 different resurrection appearances, that no one was expecting Jesus in this gospel in the ways that he came back. Not only that, if you were here last week, We heard the Easter morning account where Mary meets Jesus in the garden and she thinks he's the gardener. She can't recognize him at first. And when Jesus comes to that locked room for the first time, where most of his disciples are hiding because they are afraid of the same authorities who put Jesus to death, they only recognize Jesus when he shows them his wounds. He comes in and says, "Peace be with you." And I'm sure they were terrified because they were behind closed doors. No one was supposed to get in. And suddenly someone appears in their midst. And they're not actually sure of what's happening. And then we're told, almost casually, oh, by the way, Thomas wasn't with them. Thomas was somewhere else. When the other disciples were behind locked doors and they were scared out of their minds of what could happen to them as followers of the newly crucified and perhaps risen Christ, Thomas was somewhere else. And I continue to believe that he acted out of not so much a crippling doubt, but simply a desire to meet Christ the way that the other disciples had when he hears their account. They say, "We have seen the risen Lord," and I'm sure they tell the details. And is it so bad that Thomas says, "I would like to meet the risen Christ too. I would like to also put my hands into his wounds and have the same experience that you did"? And somehow, for centuries and millennia, we have often taken that as a sign of his doubt and his lack of belief. But again, he is not the only one who was not sure. He was not the only one who was wanted to see the risen Christ. We live in this in-between time where Christ has died and Christ has risen, and we look for Christ to come again, as we say week after week in our Eucharistic prayers. And the truth is, most days I assume that Christ will come again somewhere far in the future, because after all, it's been almost 2,000 years and he hasn't come back yet, and so why should I expect that I will be the one who will get to meet the risen Christ face to face when he comes back? But if it comes right down to it, although that would probably be terrifying, I would also really like to experience that. To meet God face to face before I die, undeniably, would be incredible. To see for myself, perhaps, just as Thomas and the other disciples saw, that Jesus bore the marks of his death, and yet death was not enough to stop him. And yes, I grew up in a church that embraces questions and embraces uncertainty and divine mystery. I'm also looking forward, almost certainly again after I die, to being face to face with God and getting to ask some questions. I still want to know why Jesus meets a woman who is not of the Jewish faith or ethnicity, and he tells her that he will not heal her daughter because he has come for the lost children of Israel. I would like to know why Jesus chose 12 male disciples, and why, whatever act of the Spirit was with the gospel writers, they chose to tell us more men's names than women's. Because there were women who followed Jesus too, and we know so much less about them. and they don't seem to be among the 12. Right now, I might even ask God what that noise is about, because I don't know. But I do know this. If we do insist on calling Thomas a doubter, we should remember that all of the disciples doubted, and it is okay. That Jesus came back and met Peter after Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and Jesus didn't love him any less. That Jesus, in fact, answered Thomas's request. Jesus comes back when Thomas is with the other disciples, and he doesn't say, Thomas, Thomas, sweet Thomas, why would you ask for a special resurrection appearance? He says, Thomas, I'm here. Put your hands in the wounds in my arms. Put your hand into my side. If that is what you need to understand that I am here, I offer it to you. It's not always easy to understand faith as leaving room for questions. Sometimes I wish that I wouldn't have to say, gosh, my faith looks strange from the outside. Wouldn't it be nice if there was something so incredibly self-evident about Christianity that we would have the pews full to overflowing and everyone would know and everyone would be part of our faith right here and right now? But that's not the way of the world. So what this gospel reading tells me most of all is that the days when I believe and I can accept holy mysteries and I can wonder why Jesus said and did the things that he said and did and not feel that my faith is challenged, that's great. But on the days when I wake up and all I want to do is argue with God, that's okay too. I am not loved any less for the days when I feel that my unbelief might be stronger than my belief. And when I persist in faith, when I am not sure, God will meet me. Not always offering all the new answers, but saying, so much like Jesus says to Thomas, I am here in your midst. I loved you enough to walk the earth, to die and rise again, destroying the final power of death. And I love you in your doubt as much as I do in your certainty. And so I hope and I trust that you will hear the same. On the days when you are not sure that you believe, I hope you will come here anyway, and you will let the faith of the rest of this congregation hold you. And I hope that on the days when you believe very strongly, you will remember not to hold it against someone who says to you, can we really be sure? Because God's love is for all of us. Each and every one of us, in our certainty and in our questions. Thanks be to God.